All right, we should be ready to go.
All right. I call to order this March 10th, 2022 meeting of the Moab City Planning Commission at 6:04 p.m. Want to extend a special welcome to Jeremy Lynch, who is our new Planning Commission member. This is his first meeting. Welcome, Jeremy. We're really excited to have you. And also, again, to Jill, who's another new commission member, and Jessica Thacker, who's our new assistant planner at the city. Thank you so much for sticking yourself out there to do this, everybody. We really appreciate it. First item of business, or I should say, in attendance, it looks like we have city staff, Jessica Thacker, Corey Shirtliff, Mila Dunbar-Irwin, city council member, Luke Wojciechowski, who's our city council liaison to the Planning Commission, and myself, Kaya Marienfeld, Jill Tatton, Jessica O'Leary, and Jeremy Lynch in attendance as planning commissioners. First item of business is citizens to be heard. So we are still digital. If you are interested in speaking to the commission, you can call in at the call-in number provided, Zoom in the waiting room, or of course, email us as always. Corey, do we have anybody in the waiting room?
We do. Oh, and we have one of our commission members joining as well.
Okay, great.
So we've been doing this with the council meetings. We'll let all of the citizens come into the waiting room,
okay,
and then ensure that they're here for the appropriate purposes, and then we'll get going.
Commissioner Becky Wells is also in attendance now.
So we have showing up is Josh/Kyle and Marina and Zoe. So we've entered into the Citizens Be Heard section of the Planning Commission meeting. So Josh is actually one of our applicants for a later item. So Josh, I'll go ahead and put you back in the waiting room, and we'll email you as we're getting and approaching that item if that works for you.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Okay, and then we have Marina is connecting to audio, so we'll go ahead and wait and jump over to, oh, I kicked Kaya out instead of Josh. There's with things unmuting, it's the waiting room's flying around, so everyone hold your mute buttons for a moment while I can grab one of you. There we go. Okay, Zoe, if you can hear us, you can go ahead and unmute and share screen if you'd wish. We're in Citizens Be Heard. Are you want to speak on a particular item, or were you an applicant for an item?
Oh, I'm just here to listen. I work at the Multicultural Center, and a few of our tenants live at the 200 property. So we're just here to listen.
Perfect. So Zoe, if you want, because I'll have to put you back in the waiting room, go ahead if you guys can and jump over to the live streaming YouTube channel, and then you'll be able to watch and not miss the participation. So we'll let you go and see you on YouTube.
Sorry, I'm new to this. I goofed.
No worries.
Hello, goodbye, Zoe.
Hello, goodbye. See you on YouTube.
It looks like Marina might have heard that response and left of her own accord. So we'll just assume that there are no citizens to be heard left in the waiting room. I lied. We have a call in right now, so we'll bring this person on. Hello, we have somebody calling from a 303 number. Oh, never mind, we don't. They left as well. This is the most activity we've had on a Citizens Be Heard, I think.
We're like super excited. We're like, ooh, someone's here.
All right. Well, I can safely feel like the waiting room is now empty. Hopefully everybody's up to speed. We did receive a Citizens Be Heard email. It wasn't directed specifically as a Citizens to Be Heard email, but we'll pull up real quick.
Yeah, while you're pulling that up, yeah, it was regarding one of the items on our agenda tonight, 4.2, which is the resolution 01/2022, the conditional approval of a site plan for apartments located at 238 South 400 East. I assume that's what you're talking about, Corey.
That is Ian Jewell, and so that has been shared with the Planning Commission, and everyone should be up to speed on that conversation. So with
Well,
that,
I believe it was shared with the mayor and council as well, if
I believe
Luke
that's correct.
can verify.
Yes, there were multiple strings in that. The initial response was planning commission, and then I do believe it went to all the council members. So it should have full content for both bodies.
And I guess for those listening or watching, we will address that citizen comment when we get to that agenda item, if that works.
Perfect. So I think that closes everybody that I'm aware of.
Okay, great. As always, as a reminder, if you're tuning in late, you're absolutely welcome at any time to email planning staff and the planning commission. We all get those emails that go to the planning commission email address. And it's not too late. Okay, item number 3 is a discussion item 3.1 staff update on a draft active employment households ordinance, which would be 2022-05. So this is a briefing and discussion to see where we are with this pending ordinance now. Corey?
Thank you. I do have a few slides that I'm going to share here for this. Hopefully everyone was able to watch the city council meeting on Tuesday, where we had our consultants there, the workshop on Tuesday's meeting, where we devoted time expressly for this item. This is really a very similar overview to what was discussed with that city council group. And the overview, getting into what the structure and framework of the ordinance is, and then what the content we're attempting to incorporate would be, as well as the data generated formula that our consultants with BAE are generating to produce what will be a percentage number. So that rational basis for which we're going to insert into that ordinance as far as the required percentage that will be required for active employment units in as a use parameter within the R3 multi-household residential zone and R4 manufactured housing zone. We had some updates to our timeline as well. At the bequest of the council, we have upped our public hearing for planning commission. So it had been scheduled for the same meeting as the planning commission recommendation. So we've advanced that to that regularly scheduled meeting on the 24th, where we're sitting now currently at the 10th. Next week, we anticipate having the full breadth of data from the city's generation. I would like to give credit to Dieter Charles, associate engineer, who's been helping me generate this data. It's a big lift on top of an already busy schedule, so I really do appreciate her participation. But getting that data to BAE to integrate, and Aaron Nussain during the city council meeting, I thought did a really great job at breaking down the matrix and the static elements of that formula, as well as some of those variable components. Because again, at the end of the day, we're drafting the art form of planning, which is the ordinance, but the data in which we're inserting has to be generated from that rational basis to support an essential nexus in the way that we're organizing this. So we are not, again, producing an inclusionary zoning ordinance and attempting to divert from an exaction situation, even a legal exaction, by just saying this is a generally broad use parameter amendment. Anyway, that all being said, we're hoping to have that data integrated so we can have a complete ordinance at that point, of which our land use consulting attorneys with Snow Christensen and Martineau will then be able to assess, because the data is essential to the validity of the ordinance. So they are inseparable in that way. So at that point, we'll know whether or not we have a vetted ordinance to move forward. And then for city council, they'll be able to review that, give their comments. And then that is for our next meeting on the 24th, our really big discussion. It makes sense to have the public hearing at this point, because that's where if there's to be any amendments, this is where that meeting is that's where that's going to happen, is at that meeting, where we want to, on the 29th, have our polished, ready to recommend ordinance draft. So it is a tight turnaround schedule for all of this, but we're up to the challenge and up to the task. So by the 31st, hopefully we'll have this approved. Within the ordinance itself, what was included in the packet was different from than what was included for city council, in a sense that we've been continually updating and drafting this ordinance. So it had been noted that there are just minor amendments in matters of just the grammatical structure of how things are, particular language elements. But we're also reshifting around whereas clauses, which make significant impact. And then we're waiting to hear. We have some folks in the waiting room. I'm just going to check here. Okay. So red line amendments, but we're going to wait. We're not going to include our legal review just yet. But as far as the ordinance draft, I'd love to get the planning commission's input on where we're going with this, as far as the definitions section, identifying in almost complete form the active employed household definition, and then adding our active employment unit, which is really the designated measurement, and then a household is the approval criteria. So those are the sections there that we're amending. And then the singular line amendments to the R3 zone, and I apologize, this should be manufactured housing residential zone, the R4. But it's again, that use parameter that's been put into place within those two zones. And then the major body of the ordinance being housed in a new chapter, which will be that active employment households chapter. Specifically within that larger chapter, we're going to be structuring it in a way that is similar to, really similar to our ADU ordinance, which is a similar type use that's allowed in multiple zones, but has specific parameters. So this fits nicely in that same format where we have our purpose section, of course, but general standards, submittal requirements, criteria, review procedures. City council has already requested maybe a potential special provisions section. We're going to be working on potentially incorporating that. And then enforcement is a fairly robust section that collapsed multiple supporting documents that we saw within the development agreement that was referencing active employment households, and ADU ordinance, which also incorporated active employment households. Where we're at with that right now, though, is likely to remove most of that body and just return it to a more concise understanding that if you are in violation, so it'll state when you would be in violation for one of these standards within an active employment household, it will reference it's handled under the co-compliance section of the municipal code. So it's not going to create its own enforcement statutes inside the ordinance. We're going to say it's going to be the way we enforce everything else, and here's how it's in violation. So it cleans it up quite a bit that way. This was an added component. There were some lingering questions about within the parameters of active employment household qualification, and then how that unit would have to be occupied. It could cause some concern because numbers are being thrown around, but it's critical to the structure of enforcement that there are parameters here. So just doing away with these would likely not be effective. It would undermine the whole ordinance. So the question was, if there is a designated unit, we get to that point and there's a unit that is an active employment household unit, that unit can only ever be occupied by an active employment household. And then within that framework, the minimum lease standard would be 90 days, which is what we've approved in the ADU ordinance. And what this does is really add to the effect that we are preventing a workaround of our 30-day short-term rental overnight accommodations prohibition. So this ordinance does include an overnight accommodations deed restriction, but to further help us in review, approval, and enforcement, which are categories in which we actually get to engage with the property and be hands-on. This is much more tenable. We can review it and ensure that it is complete that way. So we bumped that from 30 days to 90 days without going into it too much to eliminate the strategy that is becoming more and more pervasive, that people just sign fake leases and basically use it as overnight accommodations. Anyway, within that framework, active employment household occupancy for a minimum of 9 months total per calendar year. Now, that doesn't have to be the same tenant. It can be a mix and match of either of these two categories. But the idea here is that if an owner who is technically a second home, so the ownership is not occupying the space and that place remains vacant, it is then again being shot into the second home category, which is the purpose of this ordinance. So either by use by the owner or use by the owner's friends or acquaintances through whatever exchange of payment, would be able to use that space as kind of a workaround for the restriction in total. So that 9 month ensures that it is being occupied by somebody that is living and working in Moab. So that really rounds out, I think, where we're at with the ordinance framework here. Are there any questions? I'll stop sharing screen. Where we got to, and maybe some of the questions we had in that workshop from Robert Keller, who's our legal land use consultant, and Aaron Hussein, BAE Urban Economics. It's a lot of information, especially for the public. So if anybody from the public is watching, we'd be more than happy to walk you through this process. We're trying to activate on the moabcity.org website a FAQ section that'll be a little bit more forward facing to handle kind of these more complex components and break them down in a way that is a little bit more understandable versus all this legal jargon and planning jargon that is important to framing it, but sometimes is difficult to understand. So again, open it up maybe back to Kaya, and you can direct any questions we might have at this point.
Yeah, so as Corey mentioned, our next meeting is going to be really focused on a public hearing about the ordinance when we have it and closer to final draft form, and then also sort of ironing out those final kinks before making a recommendation to City Council, who then has a tight turnaround as well. So the earlier the better. If people have questions, if you have things you want to throw out there for our consultants to consider within the next week, ultimately, before we get something that's close to final form, before it has to be noticed to the public for that hearing, now is the time.
Corey, I'm sort of curious, as we kind of narrow down onto the percentage that we're going to go with, if we can also include in there some language making it so that you can't, if you are going to do construction in the R3 and revamp these properties, that you can't sort of down zone and build just one big house, that you have to build at density, because ultimately, I feel like our objective here is to increase density in this R3 and get more housing.
Mm-hmm.
So can that language be included in there?
I think I understand the question and the what would be the framework that we would add there. What that would do within this ordinance is likely kick us into a takings category. I don't want to speak specifically. Robert Keller is our land use attorney, and he would be the one to really address this, but given they're not here tonight, that would be my preliminary assessment, is that would likely be pushing us into a takings category unless we did a zone change for the entire zone and down zone the entire zone. That's a legal code amendment to our zoning code. but we do for these properties, we'd have to do for everything. So putting pressure onto multi-household within these zones that they could only do that through this ordinance may not work. But down zoning, or I guess what would be up zoning, it's not down zoning, what would be up zoning, but within the use category. So again, I think we could do that, but we would be removing opportunities for community there. So that's a good question. I'll get with Robert Keller to get you an official answer. That's just my preliminary take on that.
Right, because hopefully, we can get to that 66% and not, like we had discussed before, we don't want people to then go and be like, no, I don't want to do that because I don't want to give up 2 units out of 3. We want them to build, but we want more housing.
Sure. And
Hey,
that's kind of
Jessica, oh, sorry. I was just going to
Right,
ask,
go ahead.
my sound cut out when you were asking the beginning of your question. Would you mind just repeating it again? My apologies.
I was just asking about some provision in there to make it so that you couldn't just build one big house on an R3, that you needed to build multiple residences.
I have a question.
Yeah, Becky.
What's 66% that Jesso just referred to?
That's just a number. I would venture that is a potential number. We really don't know what the recommendation from BAE is going to be at, which is why it's still 0% in the draft ordinance that we have that was in the agenda tonight.
Oh, I thought she said as previously discussed. So most of the R3 parcels are built with a single family home on them currently. So you're proposing that like vacant parcels wouldn't be able to be developed like that? I'm not sure I'm understanding.
That if you're in the R3, that you would be encouraged or required to build multiple units. I mean, yeah, there would be non-conforming that are already there and already present, but if you're going to redevelop that plot, tear something down, then you should build multiple.
Do we have any other questions or comments from commissioners? Any insight from our council representative as well is always welcome. All right, I'll take silence. Thanks for your questions, folks who asked. Likewise, as you know, if you think of one after the fact and you want to email Corey, that's always on the table too. I think, Corey, I'm excited that things are shaping up. Seems like we're still.
Sorry, I have one
Oh,
question.
yeah, go for it, Becky.
So with this ordinance, just a thought, like if someone, so of the 33 or potentially 60 whatever percent Jesso mentioned of the units that are deed restricted, if someone bought that, they are required to, or developed it, whatever, they're required to, the occupant has to be someone that's renting it for 90 days that lives here, or can they use it for themselves? Is it one or the other, or is it, what's the restriction there exactly?
Sure. Yeah, I can walk you through that a little bit. So what this ordinance is calling out is occupancy. And so for a full development, there's going to be a percentage of those that are designated and will be designated in the forms of platting, and that's in the framework as well, depending on what it is that they're doing, because there's different review procedures for different scales of property. So if it's a townhome condominium, multi-household level 2 site plan, like we might see tonight, you're going to have designated units you can actually incorporate onto the plan. If it's a building permit, that needs to be handled differently, where there's planning commission reviews, there's city council reviews. Anyway, it will be evident within the plan that is produced that those units are designated. So within those units, and that's all we're talking about, not the whole project, just those, they must be occupied by somebody that meets the AEH, active employment household criteria, which is basically anybody that lives and works in Grant County, and then even some exceptions. This is language that was incorporated from the HDHO ordinance language. We've already used it in our ADU ordinance. So we're using kind of an existing mechanism here to identify local workforce. That's what the mechanism is. What we call it is active employment household. So again, that's the occupancy. So if you live here and you're the owner and you live here and you meet there, you can use that. If you are from Colorado and you buy one of these designated units, you would be essentially buying that as an investment property, because it would essentially have to be utilized by a qualified active employment household. So it would be leased to somebody that qualifies. So if you're the owner and you don't qualify, it must be leased to somebody that does qualify. Does that help answer
So
that?
the owner cannot come and use the unit themselves. They cannot occupy the unit themselves ever.
Correct.
If they don't live here.
Correct.
Okay.
So it would still be a property that they could hold on to, rent to someone who is a qualified active employment household. And then if they decide to sell that property, sell the investment, they would just have to sell it to someone who also either qualifies or will have qualified occupants.
That's right. And to an extent, and this was actually something Kaya during the ADUs had incorporated, so hats off to you, Kaya, is that, well, what if you live here and you live in one of these designated units as an owner? You're an owner and you're qualified, but then you want to leave town. You get a good job, you have to leave town, but you don't want to sell your property. Would that disqualify you? And the answer is no. You'd be able to leave, maintain ownership, even though maybe you buy a new residence somewhere else. Then somebody's able to come in and rent that is qualified. So it works that way too, that you can build and maintain equity from a local standpoint to leave. So that's a really important category. It's not just people coming in and maintaining equity. It's people that can diversify and move out. So we've tried to make it as dynamic as possible without allowing a big enough hole that people can abuse this concept. And that's the idea. There's a greater percentage likely of units that will be free market with no restrictions within the development. So if there is, when you're designing as a developer in your pro formas, that you can market the rest of those units in whatever way you wish, internationally, nationally, whatever it is, but you'll have to market those designated within that framework. So it's I think a really balanced ask, where hopefully most or more than the percentage of designated units will qualify at any given point. But if there is ever a time that ebb and flows, those designated ones will be maintained.
And the minimum unit requirement is 3 units for this to come into play?
I caught it. Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, this starts and is attached to our multi-household dwelling permitted use. So in the R3 and R4, we have permitted uses, 1 household, 2 household, those are both permitted. And then multi-household, which is 3 or more, that's where this kicks in. So 3 or more, that's when that percentage would start. So triplex, 4plex, 5plex, and onward. I might also note, we did have somebody jump into the waiting room. They've been sticking around for a while. We are well out of citizens to be heard, but we are planning commission. But I'll let Kaya make that judgment call.
Yeah, I think it's worth letting him in. This is a good point. And I can just
Oh.
explain.
Maybe as we're about to move off this topic, so I won't interrupt
Okay.
our conversation, but just want to
Right.
make a note.
Yeah, no, I think we're on, good track. I think, like you said, I am really a big fan of making this as dynamic as possible. There are a lot of really great things, for example, about the county's high density overlay. For me, one of the things that I saw as not being flexible enough to account for some of the situations here in town was the fact that it was qualifying owner, not just qualifying occupant. So I'm happy that this actually accounts for that. I think it will have the effect of certainly the easiest thing to do as a builder, a developer, or a property owner, someone who's looking to do one of these projects, is to sell to a qualified buyer for that percentage, whatever it ends up being. But it does allow, like you said, flexibility when people's circumstances change, that it will always be housing for someone who is a part of the community here in Moab. And that's ultimately what I'm concerned about the most. So I'm excited to see how that works out, basically. I think it has a lot of potential, and I think it keeps us well away from any sort of overburdensome claims as well, too, because I think ultimately it's going to be a lot easier to administer. And hopefully still work out well for people who are trying to build these kinds of units. But get people in houses, hooray.
Yes.
So if we don't have any other comments or questions, we can go ahead and end this discussion item. And then, yeah, Corey, if you want to let that person in, we can see what's going on.
Sorry, I have one brief comment.
Oh, yeah.
On what you just said in comparison to the county overlay. One big contrast to me in comparison to most of the R3 and R4 parcels in town, in comparison to the county overlay zone, is the size of the parcel and the density of the parcel. Most of our parcels in this zone in town are probably less than 1/4 of an acre to maybe up to 1/2 an acre. Very sparingly, we have like a couple acre parcel, which Corey could probably attest to. There's not very many big parcels in town. So creating like a housing restriction like this in the county would work really well, because you can get 40 units on an acre or more potentially, whereas in the city we're looking at 3 to 4 to 5, which if you create this kind of restriction, I'm afraid it will just prevent them from even developing these parcels, and potentially like looking for some kind of workaround, like Jesso was maybe alluding to. Are they going to subdivide it and build a house and a twin home? Are they going to subdivide it 3 times and just build 3 houses to get away from this ordinance? I think applying this to apartments would be more effective, because an apartment developer is going to want, more naturally, like a building full of people 12 months out of the year, which is, our local citizens, whereas a townhouse development with 3 to 4 townhomes, maybe someone that wants to come use it themselves in addition to renting it, monthly to someone that's here seasonally or something like that. So I don't know, just some thought in regard to that comparison to the HDHO.
Violet has words. Thanks, Becky. Okay, any other comments before we end this discussion item? Hi, kiddo. Okay, we can move on, but in the interim, Corey, if that individual still in the waiting room, we can let them in and see what they are here for.
We'll give them a moment to connect to audio here.
I'm wondering if that is Molly also from the Multicultural Center, who might just be here to watch as well.
Looks like they're having a hard time connecting to audio.
Uh,
Whatever your discretion is, Kaya.
Yeah, we can go ahead and move on just because we do have quite a few things on the agenda, including some discussion. Yep, they're gone. Whoever you were, sorry, please try again if you need to say anything to the commission. Okay. Next item, we have our first action item, which is proposed resolution 08-2022, a resolution conditionally approving the McLaughlin minor subdivision or property located at 458 West, 200 South, Moab type 4532.
We might have skipped an item, Kaya. We have a discussion item.
Oh, yep, I'm sorry, my bad. Going back, our second discussion item, discussion and direction on development of landscaping standards, which we started last time, which is a discussion and possible direction to staff, solicit feedback from the Planning Commission regarding advised direction for development of landscaping standards based on the materials. Thanks, Corey.
Well, thank you. I'll hand it right over to Mila Dunbar-Irwin, our Sustainability Director, who is coordinating this landscaping standards effort. And I'll take it away, Mila.
Awesome. Thanks. Can you guys all hear me okay? Okay, awesome. Yeah, so you saw the presentation by the consultants on the draft landscape standards. There were a few kind of inflection points there where for staff we'll need to get some direction to know how to proceed as far as potentially writing it up as an ordinance or code amendments that would then go to public hearing and go through the process. We chatted with the water board at their regularly scheduled meeting yesterday and asked them these same questions that I would like to hear your thoughts on. And then we'll be going to the city council on March 22nd to have the same discussion. So everybody has now seen the presentation and had access to the memo, and we're now coming back to all of the public bodies to get their opinions about which direction to go. Then we'll go back to city council and hopefully get some good solid direction as far as what we want to do with this potential ordinance code updates. So I'm wondering, so I have 3 questions. The first one is really the most important one, and the other 2 are related, but the answer to the first one may change some of that too. So the question is really, do you prefer, and let me know if you need some clarification on definitions, do you prefer the water budget approach that was discussed or the suite of other recommendations? That's the main question, because if we go the water budget approach, then many of those other recommendations are no longer necessary.
I feel like that's such a big question for us to answer when ultimately city council has to make that call. I'm wary of sort of like precluding options if it's just going to get backtracked. And I don't know if our council liaison can chime in about sort of what discussions have been at council so far, or.
The council hasn't discussed yet. And I think that our idea here was to get the recommendations from the water board and the planning commission and then take those to the council so that they would have that prior to having their discussion, so they would know what you all thought.
Would you mind giving a quick summary of those 2 options for, I would say, the majority of commissioners who weren't at that meeting? We only had 3 of us there, if I remember correctly, at the time.
Sure. Yeah, so I think, I don't know if Corey included the memo again in your packet, but it's accessible.
Yes.
From last week. Yeah. So the water budget approach is essentially the most flexible option. What it does is it allows for a homeowner to design whatever landscape they want. Although, there are some of the other recommendations could be combined with this to put some bounds on that, but within a certain amount of gallons per square foot that's allowed. So it's designed specifically to be able to be calculated by a non-professional. So included in the water budget approach would be those resources, the calculator that anybody could do. And, it basically allows for, whatever kind of distribution of landscape elements that the developer, whoever they are, wants on their property within a certain overall bound. So I don't remember exactly what the details were, but I think it was 15 gallons per square foot or something like that. And you would essentially be able to have that be, a combination of some turf grass and then some water-wise landscaping, or, just water efficient plants, or a pool, and then rocks. So you could, kind of distribute that water use over your landscape however you wanted to. That's the water budget approach. It's, this overall number that's calculated based on the square footage of your property, then you distribute it however you want. The other recommendations were more specific. So, percentage of living plant material, mulch, efficient irrigation systems, hydrozones, maintenance requirements, a species list. I don't remember all of them to list, but there's 11 total. And how this was discussed at the water board yesterday is that, they were in favor of the water budget approach, and then in addition wanted to include the hydrozone requirement, which is essentially just making sure that the plants on one zone of your irrigation all require the same amount of water. So you're not, overwatering some of them that really don't need it, or underwatering others, and, trying to make up that difference. So hydrozones, and then potentially something having to do with maintenance. And I think there was one other that they were recommending. But the living plant material requirement, minimum percentage of living plant material, was also discussed. And there was a desire for a number, but the one in the packet is 25%, which they all felt was a little bit too high. So, essentially, the water budget allows for a lot of flexibility. The other option is to just have that, or combine it with some of the others, or have just some of the others, which specify, living plant material and plants and what it would actually look like. Oh, the other one that they liked was the species list, which we will be developing anyway. And I think the question is whether or not that would be a requirement or a guideline.
I have, in addition, that what was shared in the packet, I could pull that up. For me, I'm super visual. If anybody in the planning commission would like to see that separation of what the two categories are.
That would be great, Corey. I'm looking at the draft recommendations and things that were included in the packet right now, but it'd be nice to see side by side. Thank you. On behalf of us visual people.
The water budget is just included as one of the recommendations, unfortunately. So it's not broken out like that any clearer.
Right. So this is, at the beginning of the summary shows and identifies those 11 recommendations of individual standards sections. And then if we scroll down to page 16, I believe, and what we're scrolling past is a more specific breakout of those, let's see, irrigation system criteria. So that was one of them in the summary, and then it breaks it out more specifically throughout the material. And then we get down to 16, which is where we start seeing that water budget explanation and breakouts.
So Mila, it's water budget sort of, or the slate of other things.
Yeah, it's water budget and potentially some of the other ones.
Yeah.
Or just the other things, or just a water budget with no restrictions. Mm-hmm. So there's sort of those three options.
I like some of the recommendations. I have to say, I am not personally in favor of any requirement for living plant material. I feel like there's just such a diversity of residences, commercial properties, gosh knows what in the community that I think it absolutely 100% makes sense to have, water budget and awarenesses of that. But I feel like anything that's going to require someone to do something new with their property that maybe they aren't already doing, other than I think the non-living permeable ground cover requirement is great because that helps with fugitive dust. It helps with, invasive species and weeds if you put gravel or you put mulch or, you have some sort of ground cover. I think that's important for a variety of reasons that are honestly like a community issue. But I feel like it would be odd to, and I know plenty of other communities do this at a much higher percentage, but I feel like Moab sort of in the tradition of being like not quite as, big brothery, it might not work here. There are people who very much don't want to do anything with their small property, and requiring them to have 25% of anything planted might just feel strange. I don't know what others think. It's clearly something that's used in a lot of other places. And I understand why, and I know that environmentally it's probably better, but I don't know, it feels like a little outside of the scope to me.
I'll add my 2 cents in here, if that's all right, Kaya.
Mhm.
The challenge with this is that these are all really great recommendations, it seems to me. One of the things that stuck out to me was that under number 7, stakeholders have been overwhelmingly supportive of this recommendation. I lean in the direction toward something similar to what the Water Board suggested with adopting the water budget with either recommended or including those categories which are, primary to water. So hydrozoning, irrigation system, water-wise, and then maybe turf limitations. I have my own questions about, eventually what the nature of a native plant will look like, though I am supportive of certainly using native plants now. But knowing the people who put this together and just reviewing the stakeholders, if they're making a recommendation to include the water budget, I think that would be a great starting point. And then to do something similar by including, in my recommendation, hydrozones, water-wise, and irrigation system additions.
I echo what Jeremy says. The hydrozoning makes good sense. I do that at my house. I think honestly, it's just difficult to not overwater certain things if you don't. So, but that's for people who already have, we're not requiring people to go plant things that they don't already have planted, or to sort of do any sort of specific kind of landscaping. This is if you already have landscaping and you already have plants on your property. So I feel like that sort of sticks with that a little bit better. I think they're all really wonderful recommendations, and I personally will keep this list handy whenever I'm making decisions about my property or recommendations. But I agree with Jeremy. So it was hydrozones. I think the turf limits do make sense. I think there are definitely that, just because it's such a basic thing that I feel like is sort of the low hanging fruit on water conservation, not just because of the kind of plant that it is, but because of the watering practices that are inherent with that kind of turf. There's a lot of evaporation when you water lawns, essentially. So I think kind of that seems to make good sense in the context of what we're doing. And then, I would, I think I'm pushing my own sort of explanation that I just gave. I still like the non-living permeable ground cover requirements just for all those other reasons. But I think if we're trying to stick closer to the really water adjacent issues, that maybe that one wouldn't be on the list in this instance. So. Anyone else have any feedback or comments? I was hoping Jeremy would, with his past expertise and experience. So thanks, Jeremy.
I think it's great as a guideline. I don't think we should be requiring specific items for new construction. I don't really see it as a problem with most new construction. I think most people are pretty aware of wanting to plant native plants and be water wise with their landscape. So I don't see it necessarily needing to be a requirement, but maybe a guideline, because in selling houses to people, they typically ask like, what are the plants I should plant, or what should we do? And I always just send them down to, what is the name of that nursery? I know.
Landscapes.
Yes. Yeah. Go talk to her. She'll tell you what to do. And that's what people want, they're not wanting to.
Yeah.
And then also it like varies when you say turf, like what if they're planting an entire yard of buffalo grass versus bluegrass? Like, would that change the percentage? Would it not? Like, because it just, is a different species and doesn't require much water. So
Yeah, Mila, was there a provision? And I'm looking now. Apologies if I missed it, but it sort of just lumps all turf in together.
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting question. Honestly, some of those grasses that don't require much water are actually on the WaterWise plant list. So I think that's how that would be dealt with, is that, Northern Utah, USU has been doing a lot of research on which turf species are actually water efficient plants. And I think that's where they would be housed, is in that recommended species list.
Yeah, I would be, again, I'm curious what city council, will think and what their perspectives are, because ultimately they're the decision makers. But I definitely like hydro zones. I think that makes sense. And I think that makes sense from just an educational standpoint too. I think that's something that it took me a while to figure out when I first moved here. I can't imagine I'm alone in that. As far as the watering needs of different sort of little ecosystems on your property. And then the budget approach. That's ultimately, we're trying to encourage better practices, but if someone wants to have a turf lawn and, water it as much as somebody does a food garden and native plants that produce, food and pollination for the whole neighborhood, then I guess that's up to them if it's the same budget.
Comment from a staff perspective on this. When I'm looking at this, and again, all my lenses are going to be maybe different from an idealistic lens of community development. And along with that, my lens is, what does this look like as an approval process, enforceability process? With the water budget, it keeps it very clean that way. What we do if we get into the realm of guidelines, which is very similar within the realm of conditional uses, is if it's a guideline, which we do have in our code right now, in many ways, they're in different sections guidelines. If it is not required, it's essentially non-enforceable. Therefore, it is irrelevant as a review process. We can say and encourage, but if that developer come back says, no, I don't want to do it, then we can say, well, okay. So it really, again, it becomes a what degree are we involving these standards? So if we go with a full standards list, I'd like those to be developed in a way that they are enforceable and required. But what that does do is put a lot of review into somewhat of an intricate process, both from the applicant and builder's standpoint, but also the review side for development review team. So that's just from my perspective. I want us to be aware of when we're trying to incorporate what our best mixed solution might be. We have that in mind, that we don't set ourselves up for failure in any one way, or we set ourselves up for an ordinance which feels really good, but is at the end of the day really challenging for anybody to really enforce or have developers include. So the water budget seems to me to be very clean, enforceable, and static. And then I would jump to the other end of the spectrum. So of the two options, that's kind of one. And then my second would be standards, and then have those standards be really well articulated and laid out. So again, that's just food for thought for the commission, because I would no matter what our recommendation at the end of this conversation is, I feel the points that Jeremy has made, which is kind of more in that realm of the middle option, I think has been well thought out, well vetted by the water board, by Jeremy in those thought processes. So I don't want to take away from that. Just something to think about as we move forward.
Are we seeing a current issue with people building new projects or developments using too much water or not planting desert native plants?
From staff perspective, anecdotally, I would say no. I think, Becky, your comment about most developers, first of all, most developers want to do what's attractive. They want it to be successful and look good and operate well for either the people purchasing or the tenants that would be moving in there. So what we're seeing is a natural shift to xeriscape, which isn't the whole situation, but it is a kind of I guess automatic adjustment that's already occurring as opposed to what we kind of previously thought of as, long strips of island grass that within the ordinance, spaces less than 10 feet, they end up really struggling in our climate. Shade becomes an issue as well. So to answer your question, no, I don't think it is becoming more of an issue. I think it's becoming less of an issue, but there are projects out there, especially on the larger scale, commercial scales, that are national, where it doesn't matter where they're going. And we've had overnight accommodations in the past where they were pushing a really static corporate development style, and it didn't meet our dark skies. It didn't meet a number of our codes, and they really fought us on that because they said, well, this is what we do. And we had to actually go and research some places in Oregon where they amended it to the community and it looked really good. And then they ended up coming into compliance with something that is what we'll call more Moab. So I don't want to say
it sounds like maybe more of the concern is like on larger commercial developments, maybe not your average homeowner that's building a house.
I think that's the spectrum. I think if you're in the middle where it's a developer, they are doing that. If it's an individual homeowner, a lot of folks, they still do love the really traditional American dream style. Lots of turf, front yard, backyard, and side yard. So we have seen that come online consistently. I don't think there's been a huge decrease there, but generally over the scope, it's all working its way that way. But there are still a lot of people, especially on the single household, 2 household scale, that are doing that, and then up on the corporate scale. But most folks in the middle, where it is kind of that more involved development or applicant, that's where we're seeing it really take a nice automatic shift. So I think that these are worth pursuing, I guess, is the result of that question.
Yeah, I like it. I'm looking more at the, what some of the potential supporting code language might be in several of these sections. And I think, regardless of the overarching requirements, I think there's a lot of things that are in here that we should 100% do. Like when you're looking at the section about turf, saying that HOA governing documents, basically CC&Rs, that would require a certain percentage or the use of turf in landscapes are void. Like that seems like a no-brainer to me. I think things that are requirements of things that are not water-wise are absolutely something that I think it's within good sense scope to address. Likewise, things saying that turf can't be in non-usable areas like median streetscapes, parking lots, things like that. That still allows the grass for the kids and the pets to play. That still allows, like my neighborhood, our HOA, we have 2 common areas. One of them is turf grass that all the kids play in. And then the other is all native plants, and it's low water, xeriscaped native plants. Like I'm pretty confident we would still be good having that as the neighborhood overall, with not really having big yards on the individual lots. So I feel like absolutely those things that go through and sort of check off of those. Here are things that are actively preventing individual homeowners, individual property owners, developers, businesses from making more water-wise choices, or things that are easy incentives that are things that people are by and large already doing anyway. Those seem like a no-brainer to me. And those are the times when I am supportive of it being like just a flat out, this is what's in the code now. This is what we require. Because
Are
yeah,
you aware of current subdivisions that require that in Moab?
I'm not, but I'm sure there's some. There's a wonky amount of of HOAs, and it would, it would stop. I feel like I'm always trying to think of what like the outlier would be on the everyone mostly complies anyway thing. Maybe there's some huge parcel and some developer from like West Jordan wants to come in and make it just look like West Jordan, which is like a lot of big lawns, and wants to require that in the CCNRs. I really don't know. I think it's nice. The fact that most people are already in compliance, or everything getting built is already in compliance, kind of supports just having it in code again to sort of provide for those outliers. So you're not like what the heck if someone comes along. Yeah, there's a lot of, yeah, Corey.
That was a comment you made during the presentation. I think worth note of, if it's something that we're all doing all the time, maybe it is worth putting in the code, even if it is kind of redundant in that sense, because every once in a while somebody will come along. But I think to Becky's point, to really analyze and break it down where we want to be precise in these things, using turf as an example, the good examples that you provide, I think there's also some examples where I get there's example of this section that says to be limited to areas with suitable shade. So the word suitable throws into mind a whole bunch of, and as an attorney, I'm sure that what you always kind of quote as squishy language. And that's what it comes down to. What is suitable? Who decides that? Is it planning commission? Is it the interpretation of the zoning official? And then by that, where do we go from there? So there's a bunch of other things similar to that, where there can be a more robust purpose section that can really help drive the interpretations that will inevitably come for some of those, but where it's like no landscape strips narrower than 10 feet, that's super clear, very clear, easy to enforce. But then there are sections where it talks about kind of that more artistic element of it, and that's what we'd have to really screw down and make sure we're aware of what we're putting into the code.
Yeah, so like in the potential supporting code language in the turf section, I would say maybe no on the exceed a certain percentage. Yes on it has to be usable if there's turf put in. Yes on getting rid of the HOA prescriptions. And then the other stuff, I think maybe not. I'm just trying to keep in that sort of like sphere. And again, city council completely disagree with me, with us, all that stuff, and do it. That's always the backstop. But just in the interest of like you said, like low hanging fruit, we want to get rid of things that are impediments to people making, good water conservation choices, planting native plants. I like actually incorporating the Grand County noxious plant list into code that's mentioned in a section. Again, maybe this isn't the place to do it with sort of the water umbrella. I think certainly it makes sense, but maybe not. But yeah, I'd much rather like discourage planting, Ravenna grass and stuff than turf maybe sometimes. So
I'm in favor of discouraging from planting noxious weeds, but I think requiring people to plant or do anything a certain way isn't really necessary if people are already trending that way. I understand Corey's perspective of like, if people are doing it, let's just make it code. But then you're creating a whole nother layer of work for Corey and everybody in his office. How much longer is it going to take to get a building permit? How much time does that take? How much money does that cost? Is it necessary? Is it necessary if people are already wanting to do, landscaping this way? Do we create more work for Corey having to analyze sprinklers and water usage and plant percentages? I don't think it's necessary. That's just my feeling.
I would say, trending back to what you said before, Corey, and adding to what Becky's saying, that the starting point of number 7, the water budget, as Corey said, seems like the most streamlined way to begin. Leave it then maybe to city council to determine what else to include based on the politics of the community and everything else that they want to take into account. But at least looking at what number, what percentage, what amount of water we're using is at the very least an educational tool that people can take on themselves as part of the process, and a little more work here to do a thing that will help us down the road when water supplies may be more limited. Seems useful now, better now than waiting another few years as we've been already doing.
Yeah, I agree. And it's clear, it's clean. It's, it's something we're already keeping track of. If you're a city water user or a county water user. So. Mila, is that helpful at all? I know we just sort of sent you off into the void again, but.
No, that's great. Yeah, that's super helpful. And, the only other follow-up questions that we had were, do you have any of these standards that you specifically oppose? Like any that you would not like to see moving forward?
Becky?
And that can be from, that can be from a cost perspective, or from, whatever other perspective. We've been developing these with a consistent eye towards trying to make sure that they're not too expensive. So, whether it's that, or whether it's, any other reason, are there any ones that you would strongly recommend they do not adopt?
I guess I'll read it. I actually really don't like requiring people to plant something. That just, as someone whose literal job is advocating for trees and plants and stuff, like I don't like that. in very contrary to sort of what I personally feel, but I just think it just adds something that I think could be burdensome for people, which isn't a good thing.
I agree with Kaya. I don't think we should be mandating what people can plant or can't plant in their yard. The trend, and most of, I sell new houses, I see developments, I see what people are doing, and most people want natural desert scape, maybe a little bit of grass, most of the time not. Some people want their whole yard grass, but they're the minority in that scenario. So I don't really think this is something to worry about, and something that we need to mandate and create more work for Corey and his office. That's how I feel about it. I think that these are great guidelines, and I think that they're wonderful tools for people to use when building a house in Moab and wondering what plants to plant and how to do what they need to do. And I think it's a wonderful resource in that way, but I don't think it should be mandated.
I think the question there is more, are you okay with, for instance, somebody who blades a whole lot and leaves it with just a house? Because currently, I believe we have standards where it does require some plants. So that is something that we actually already require. And the concern is, would it be okay to just have like a completely graded lot with just dirt?
Yeah, I think anything that's scaling up on requirements of what you have to have from what we currently have in code, other than I do think it makes sense for a lot of reasons to have some sort of cover requirement. That doesn't have to be living plant material. It doesn't have to be anything that people have to maintain, but it's just at this point, it's like, do you want your whole property to erode away next time we have a major flood event in town? If not, put down some gravel or some mulch or something, but I think otherwise, anything that scales up from any sort of landscaping requirement we have right now just might be something extra on people's shoulders who might not have the time or the finances to make that work.
So you would want to keep what we have now, but not add?
I think if it's already there, we have it now. Obviously enforcement is always a question, but.
Well, on that note, I'm so excited about this conversation because our landscaping code is, and you've heard me say this before, is circular. And then within that circle is undefined in many, many ways. So we have multiple sections that infer that landscaping is required. Go see this section. And then that section defines it out maybe a little bit further and then references another section. But you end up reference the subzone that you're in. And so you end up going in the circle where it never does talk about it. So under 17, '06 definitions, the only place that we nail down what landscaping is. So we require landscaping as a part of projects. On larger projects, commercial or parking lot areas, there are green elements to that landscaping definition as far as shade related. But generally, when we're talking about homes or multiples of homes, landscaping is a combination of plants, trees, shrubs, vines, ground covers, lawns, rocks, pools, green screens, fences. It goes on and on, but it doesn't ever. So it's basically saying it can't be dirt, which is good. It says that's our bare minimum, is you can't blade it and leave it. You can blade it and then put in rocks at the very minimum, ground cover rocks. But everything up from there is option. So that's the starting base, which is,
So I think that certainly leave that, if you want to add things to the list that qualify as being landscaping, that's great too. But I think saying like we need 25% living plant material is not something that I'm in support of.
Not to be contradictory, but just to express my opinion, I'm something of a landscape radical. I would drag gray water out of educational and best management practices into the fold, but I'll say that any of these that the city chooses to implement would be a good thing. Start with the water budget and add as much as you want, because the more we add, the better. I'm not in favor of telling people exactly what to plant, but I don't think that's exactly what's happening here. I think there are recommendations on categories by which people can be most responsible. And so it's then their choice. And I think there will always be workarounds for, if, for example, we included the non-permeable or the permeable surface as an alternative to plants, and figure out a way to make it work for multiple parties without missing the point of the specificity of this document, because there's a lot of good information in here.
Yeah, well said, Jeremy. Thank you. Okay, any other comments? I do want to be mindful of time. Mila's time, hours, and then we have 2 action items tonight too we haven't gotten to yet. Anything else before we move on? Mila, anything else you need from us?
That was super helpful. I really appreciate it. And I'll present your comments in general, that it doesn't, I'm not going to make it a formal, obviously, planning commission, opinion, but just general comments, which, and then plus the water board comments to the city council on March 22nd. And then hopefully we'll have an actual code amendment proposal before you after that. Great.
Thank you so much for your work on this.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. It's a different conversation than we're able to normally have, but I think it's really valuable, hopefully. Okay. Our first action item, I am in fact on this item now. Yes. Okay. 4.1, proposed resolution 08-2022, a resolution conditionally approving the McLaughlin minor subdivision or property located at 458 West, 200 South. Take it away.
all right. Again, just a very brief presentation. Minor subdivision application, pretty straightforward, resulting in the resolution 08. We are doing a recommendation action tonight that would go to City Council for land use authority approval. Property owner Doug McLaughlin's property, 458 West, 200 South, over in our RA1 zone. Fairly sized parcel, being split basically in 2. There's a history to this property, and it's relating mostly to the development of wells. I think at one point this was actually already subdivided, but in order to accommodate his well site, drawing for water for irrigation, he needed to consolidate those. And so you'll see a lot of kind of on the underlying GIS layer there. This is the main home. So this is 500 West, Cane Creek, and then at 200 South, private drive access. So this was proposed to planning, in line for planning commission at our last meeting, but and this is the recorded county plat here. You'll see and identify it's very blurry on this one. But some existing easement for access for the rest of that property. This is actually a private street, private drive access. It's not actually public right-of-way road, which is where some of the issues for the subdivision came. You'll see this property actually overtakes what is the street, but there's been a prescriptive use and perpetual use of private street there. So we've identified that as the continued easement of that little neighborhood, as well as what was included. And so why this is a condition of recommendation is we've had increased information on what may be also in that easement. So we had a storm drainage condition here. Actually, in between the time that we were able to notice and post this subdivision planning commission, they were able to reconcile that. So we actually do have the updated plat. So it'd be, given it wasn't noticed and hasn't been pre-reviewed, I'll go to the end here. So this is the updated plat. You'll identify it's very, very small and a little bit blurry probably in this presentation format. But the ingress egress easement, as well as that storm drainage easement being called out. So they've sufficiently accommodated the city engineer's condition of approval. So we can, if you'd like, approve it as a complete recommendation without the condition, but whatever the feeling is, and how comfortable you are with that. So that's really, that's it, pretty short item. So I'll exit our shared screen. And allow any discussion or where the body would like to go.
Any discussion? Anyone have any questions? Just looking
It's
all
pretty straightforward.
Okay, for those of you who are new and for those of you that have been here a while, just a reminder, if you look at the agenda summary, which is the first document in the packet agenda, there is a recommended motion that's always going to be written out for you about halfway down the first page. It will have any conditions that are required on it typically, or at least reference conditions, and should just be set to read if you would like to make a motion. We can either forward a positive conditional recommendation to City Council with or without modifications, continue or table the item and give specific direction to the applicant and city staff, or forward a negative recommendation, again, with specific findings for the reason for that recommendation.
Thanks for that clarity, Kaya.
Yeah. It wasn't always written out, and I so appreciate that it is these days. Anyone like to make a motion? You're absolutely welcome to. And we can also have discussion after we have a motion on the table.
Poor Doug. He's just wanting this. I'm just kidding. I know we'll get
We just want to make some drama.
there. Well, as it's fairly quiet, I will identify that we are responsible for making an action on this. I understand that in City Council, if an action is not called for, it is then not officially tabled, but just moves on. The meeting moves on. In this case, the property owner does have certain rights as long as the the minor subdivision meets the requirements and parameters of legal lots. There really isn't too much discretion we have. So again, there is a condition here, of course, but would like us to encourage us to make a motion on this.
I'll make the motion to forward a positive conditional recommendation to City Council.
Okay. We have a motion. So let's see. Would that be with the condition, Jeremy? Would you mind reading that portion as well?
And Jeremy, you can surmise it's just section 1. You don't have to go into A, as long as just section 1 is on the record.
Okay, I'll move to forward a conditional positive recommendation to City Council on Moab City Resolution 08-2022, a resolution approving the McLaughlin Minor Subdivision, property located at 458 West, 200 South, Moab, Utah, 84532. With the following condition, all comments shall be addressed to the satisfaction of the city engineer prior to City Council approval.
Great, thank you, Jeremy. We have a motion on the table. Anyone like to second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion before we vote? All right, I'm taking that as a no. Corey, whenever you're ready, we can do a roll call vote.
All right. Jessup,
Aye.
Jeremy,
Aye.
Becky,
Hi.
Jill,
Aye.
and that's us. So we have,
You forgot me.
oh, Kaya. I'm so,
I vote aye as
how
well.
do you feel? Okay, thank you.
I'm easy to
Jeez,
forget.
Corey.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Looks like the motion passes unanimously, has been recommended positively to City Council. Thanks, everybody, and for bearing with like the awkward silence of the parliamentary procedure sometimes. Okay, our final action item, proposed planning resolution 01-2022, a planning resolution conditionally approving the level 2 site plan for the Lost Springs Apartments on property located at 238 South, 400 East. I know there are several people watching who are waiting for this agenda item. We appreciate your patience sticking with us. Corey, you want to give a background for us before we chat?
I will. I'm also letting Josh Godfrey come online here as the applicant. I've sent him an email. He's been in the waiting room, so hopefully he's able to jump on here live shortly. But I'll start the presentation here. All right. So looking at our planning resolution 01-2022 for the Lost Springs Apartments located over on, oh, that is incorrect information. That's from a previous item. I'm sorry about that. Let me pull that up. Let's go back here. Okay, I'm sorry that didn't upload and save. The location is at 238 South, 400 East, Moab, Utah. Property owner is Hampton Roads, LLC. Applicant is Josh Godfrey. Parcel size that we're identifying is, that is so frustrating, it didn't save. 97,474 square feet, so just coming up to 2.24 acres. It's in the R3 multi-household residential zone and in the C5 neighborhood commercial zone split zone. Proposed use being residential multi-household apartment. Project size is 80 unit multi-household apartments developed with pool and clubhouse, proposing 120 spaces. So if you can just picture all that information plugged in right there. This is our vicinity map over in our neighborhood commercial C5 zone. Beerside building just here and Milt's just down on the corner here. This is the recorded county plat for the town site, identifying those separate ownership properties throughout the block there. This is an excerpt from their civil set plans. It shows as the site plan a little bit more detail of the layout of parking, landscaping strips as we're talking about and how those are going to be organized, as well as what is essentially our R3 residential building here, 2 stories, and then clubhouse in this location, and then residential building and residential building block here. This is our landscape plan, a little bit more colorful, gives a little more context to how the site's going to feel after development. very interesting looking at our landscaping plan, following our landscaping discussion here. Interesting to see how some of our code has implied the required green space on this property, yet how it might actually manifest in the project's field. So anyway, this is an excerpt from that, what we'll call, I think it's building A, as I think it's identified on most of the plan sets, where we have garage parking and then circulation paths that are actually exteriors and units on the ground floor. This is an excerpt from the larger building, which I think is building C, but you can see that breakdown of square footage of size bedroom units and studio units there. This is one of the elevation plans for that first building, building A, identifying that garage front, and then this would be the north elevation, what you might see from that streetscape, and then that circulation path, open air between the structures there. Quick rendering of one of the potential makeups. This is one of a few different options for skins of the property as far as materials go. Consistent with what we're seeing is more of a contemporary Moab look of natural materials, but then also within the color palette that is kind of blending in with our landscape. So this is including some blacks, but others had include different types of material there. So very quick overview of the site plan. Kaya, at this point, I'm not sure if you'd like to stop sharing screen. We have Josh Godfrey present as the applicant. If you want to open up for maybe a quick narrative and some explanation from the applicant, and then we can get into discussion.
Yeah, Josh, thanks for coming to the meeting. We appreciate having you here. Yeah, if you just want to give a brief sort of background of the project, intents, I'm curious about the likely number of units you're hoping to have. If maybe you could just answer that question the best of your ability now, and then just sort of introduce it. And then we'll probably have questions, comments if you want to stick around. That'd be great.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, everyone. It seems like it's been quite the process, as you guys know, with development. I think my first meeting with Corey was back in April of last year. So we're finally here almost a year later. But yeah, we're excited to be here, and we're excited to hopefully solve some of the desperately needed housing in Moab. We bought this property back in 2016 with plans to do some sort of redevelopment. We weren't sure when that was going to be, but as we started moving forward last year, we have done some things to hopefully mitigate some of the, we realized that there are people living in the mobile home park currently. There are 20 mobile homes on site right now, and we stopped leasing. So as soon as we started the design on this project, we stopped leasing any vacant units. So anytime someone moved out, we didn't release it to try and help mitigate the transition. So right now we have 15 occupied units, and one of them is our property manager who is going to stay on site. We're going to figure out a way to accommodate him through the construction, and we'll probably stay on board as far as an employee as well. But yeah, so the project is 80 units. So it's split up into 3 buildings. On the R3 zone, there are 12 units. That zone obviously has a little bit less density than the C5. So from what my understanding is that R3 zone would be, we'd have to follow the new zone change with the active employment household, which we have no problems with. We see the whole project being long-term rentals. So that, yeah, it's not an issue at all. But yeah, and then our other, the majority of the units are on that C5 parcel. And then the clubhouse, I don't know what questions you guys have, but the clubhouse, we plan to have a leasing office. So we'll have on-site management. It'll either be a pool or a hot tub. We're still kind of figuring that out. We think there's probably more demand maybe for a hot tub based on the size. And I'm a millennial. I feel like I never get in the pool. I always get in the hot tub though. And then there's some garage spaces. We plan on having bike parking and probably like a bike. So there'll be like indoor bike storage somewhere on the property, as well as probably a bike station for bike repairs. And we hope that it's a great contribution to the city and provide some good housing for people downtown.
Great. Thank you, Josh. Appreciate it.
No problem.
Corey, what do you, or if this might be a good time for people to ask questions of Josh, maybe I'll just upfront address. We definitely have gotten some input from the community, as you mentioned, about, concern, I think valid concern. And I share that concern about, we 100% need higher density housing and apartments that locals can afford to rent, own, what have you. It's a bummer that means displacing existing low income housing. I understand with limited places in town, that is inevitably how it works sometimes. But I think the main concern truly is that the residents there now don't feel like they were notified, and they had to sort of hear this through the grapevine through the planning process of this site plan. I completely understand that there's legal notice requirements, and then there's also like just good practice of being, kind and letting people have, especially in our community, when there's just like, you could almost say if you had 9 months notice, you still couldn't find a place. Certainly on a month, it's a heck of a lot harder. So just, I think a lot of the main concern we got not was that things are being redeveloped, but really just that a lot of the current tenants, many of whom are Spanish speaking and have even that extra barrier to figuring out what's going on, just felt sort of blindsided by this and were surprised to see it be an issue in front of the Planning Commission before they themselves were notified. And that was really the gist of a letter we got. Some correspondence from Ian Jewell, who I believe is one of the current residents, who talked to some others as well, just making sure we knew that none of the tenants there now have actually been notified that this was coming, other than, like you said, when you were not renewing leases. I feel like there was a little bit of a, if folks were aware of sort of what that probably meant, that would have been, I think, for some folks a bit of a heads up, but certainly nothing in the way of like, this is our plans, this is the timeline, things like that. That has nothing to do with your site plan. I just wanted to bring that up. I think it's our responsibility when we get that feedback from the community. If other
do you want me to respond?
I don't know if other commissioners have comments, feedback, anything like that beforehand, but Corey, I know you and I spoke briefly about this as well. Jessa, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I just had a question about, so in the R3, your focus is going to be long-term rentals, but in the C5, is it short-term?
It's all long-term.
All long-term.
So I think, Corey, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the minimum is 30 days. But we intend this to be long-term. Now, if there's someone that comes in and has a contract that works in tourism for 4 months out of the year or something, I think we should hopefully be able to accommodate those types of people as well. So those would be a shorter, 4 month, 9 month, 6 months, depending on what that looks like. But that depends on people's circumstances. But we don't really we see the main demographic renting these are people that live and work in Moab.
Yeah, and we still
people that are currently in those units, are they going to be priced out, or would they be given any sort of accommodation once it's built to move back in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we've actually, we started talking with the city about the residents a year ago, actually, or it was in April. And so Corey knows this was top of mind as we went through this, and we want to be very considerate and careful how we do this, because we know these people's lives have been built at this park. Some people have been there for years. And so we are actively working. We were working with Caitlin. I believe she's no longer with Moab City, but now we're working with Barry. And we're working on potentially moving some of the current mobile homes off-site to some property the city owns on the other side of town. So we're going to do everything we can to accommodate these people. We want to be very aware of their needs and give them plenty of notice. I think legally we'd only have to give them a 30-day notice. That is not our intention. The only reason why we told Frank as soon as who's our property manager, I don't know how many of you guys know Frank. He knew as soon as we started talking with the city, and our intention is if we move forward, then to let them know as soon as possible and give them as much notice as possible and be as accommodating as possible by potentially moving some of those mobile homes or finding other housing options for them. And maybe some of them could move back to the property when it's done. Hopefully that's the case. So yeah, hopefully that answers some of your questions.
I am so delighted to see a development like this in front of us. This has been 10, 15 years coming. This is what we need, and we need more of it. And it is unfortunate, people have to move out, trailers have to get moved in order for people to redevelop properties. And it's, part of the equation. And that's where maybe we look as the city and creating spaces for people to go. In the meantime, temporary housing, campers, camp parks, legalizing camp parks. Of course, short-term rentals have been removed from code for 3 years now. So, we could potentially put back in, what am I trying to say? RV parks, but maybe for long-term residents, something to help with this process. But I just want to say I'm really happy to see a project like this coming, and I can't wait to see it go up, and I can't wait to see people living there.
Thank you.
I just, in your response to Jessica's question, I'm curious, you mentioned potentially moving some of the trailers to a city-owned property. What was?
Corey, do you know, I actually don't know the name of the site that you guys own over there. But it's
that's in reference to Walnut Lane.
Walnut Lane, yeah.
And the discussions were definitely surrounding the reuse of trailers that are compatible for moving, putting it that way, that are not in a place that the moving would be too expensive, or that they wouldn't make the move. So that's what I think is being referenced, the concept of trying to move quality trailers while we're figuring out how to move forward with Walnut Lane, moving quality trailers to that site and moving people out of trailers that are non-functioning into ones that are better quality.
I think that's a good idea. And what about taking it even further and just allowing, like fifth wheels or bumper pull campers that are, do they have to be HUD certified, or can it be a camper?
They do have to be HUD certified or 75 or more current standard of manufactured home. A RV by legal definition is a little different, or by license certification definition. So the standards in which they're built to are typically a lower standard because they're intended for temporary occupation. The increased intensity of full-time use typically will break down that type of structure, RV, whatever it is, quicker. So in the discussions we've had with the building department, so Becky already identified what are some of the other tools. What about allowing basically RV parks for long-term rental, which we've acknowledged and identified as an existing demographic in Moab. There are people that are doing this, and they're doing it illegally in unsafe conditions. And what we have been debating is, can we make this legal and make it safe to do that? And I think we've actually talked about that in a previous planning discussion, so I won't get too far down in the line of creating a pressure relief for redevelopment properties or for very dynamic seasonal type use with such a really tight market of housing, it for somebody's coming in for 3 months, that's near impossible to find accommodation. So, well, heck, I'll just camp or live in my RV in a parking lot without any livable conditions. And that's what we want to prevent. Walnut Lane, though, and so that's something we want to move forward with the council. The council at one point actually identified potentially being interested in that. There are some building code and health code regulations that we would have to navigate and understand if it's feasible that way. But Walnut Lane, is probably not where we'll look for relief when we're talking about redevelopments here, because we're just trying to get the folks that are already there sorted out. So adding to that might not be an opportunity.
I have and this is, again, a lot of this is just expressing sort of a lot of the communications we've gotten from the community, particularly like direct response community service providers, who are the people that are helping a lot of the residents who've been displaced already at several other mobile parks around town this year. Timeline, I know the not knowing is incredibly stressful for current tenants, and I feel like it would go a long way for sort of goodwill and community building if you could have any sort of extra information you could provide that will, of course, be passed along.
So obviously it's hard to nail down dates because this process takes a long time. We know that we're several months away at the very earliest. And that's if we move forward. There's a chance that this gets approved and we can't make a pencil. Construction costs are too much, or we can't get financing. There's a variety of things that could happen where it could potentially not move forward, which is another reason why we haven't started evicting or telling people that this is happening, because it's not for sure yet. We hope that it works out, and we hope that we can move forward with it. And Moab City so far has been really good to work with and cooperating with us to get to this point. But yeah, so that being said, then we are probably looking, and we have at least another 10 weeks before our architectural plans are done for a permit set. And then that goes to Moab City. Corey, I would guess that you guys probably have a review of around 6 weeks.
That'd be about right at this time. Four is the optimistic range for third-party reviews right now.
Okay, so yeah, 4 to 6 weeks. And then at that point, that's if everything looked good. There might be a second review if there were comments back. Hopefully we can work on some of that as we finish the permit set. But yeah, so I mean, minimum you're 16 weeks, but you're probably looking at, optimistically, you're probably looking at late summer, early fall.
Thanks for that information, Josh. I know people will appreciate just having just a relative idea. I feel like is helpful. And this is probably my final question. I'm just looking at the communication I had, making sure I'm saying everything. Is there any potential for something like a phased approach that might leave current tenants on at least a portion of current tenants because there are multiple structures in the project? Is that something that's been contemplated because there are current residents, or?
Yeah, we are looking at that. I can't promise anything. A lot of this we'll have to do with our contractor who we end up picking to see if we can accommodate that. But we will definitely take that into consideration, and we have looked at that as an option.
That's great. I know it's definitely not usual. I know it's very unusual. Certainly a contractor's perspective is like, man, the less here when I'm sort of making the plans and figuring things out and running utilities, the better. But we are in such a unique place in our community right now where it's just sort of a million straws breaking the camel's back all at once as far as housing, particularly with people who are used to paying $400, $500 of rent a month, for a trailer space, who then are looking at more market rates regardless of what gets built there. Any sort of phasing would, I think, be a welcome reprieve to, I think, a pretty desperate situation. I'll just sort of put that plug in, even though it's outside the scope, I think, of what we're doing tonight. But thank you for listening and being responsive. Do other commissioners have any questions while we still have the applicant here before we do just a general discussion and potentially a vote? Jeremy, anyone? Oh, Luke, go ahead.
Not a commissioner, but I guess I do have some questions that you're bringing up market rates. I was wondering if you guys had done some analysis as to what you think kind of the average rental price might be of these units. I know that there's a lot in flux and like it's going to be dependent on a lot of things, but I'm assuming in order for you guys to pencil things out, you kind of had to figure out like certain ranges for what would kind of bring the return on investment.
Yeah, so we're still very preliminary in this, just because we talk to contractors and they can't even give us a bid on really anything. We've talked to several, and they need the plans to be more complete. And then it's so wacky right now with the supply chains and the market that it's hard to get anyone to commit. You've got, I was just talking to a construction team yesterday who's done quite a bit of work down in Moab in construction. I think they've built several schools down there and hotels and all sorts of stuff. But, they were saying their framing crews, probably 6 months out if you locked them down today, so it's just kind of crazy wait times to get anything done. So as far as pricing go, obviously we have to make it pencil. We can't like lose money, but we will be. So that doesn't really answer your question, but we don't really know yet. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I get it. I think a part of it is kind of the calculus of a lot of the current residents and really a lot of the community members. I think that's really going to play a very significant portion in this. I'm part of the local homeless coordinating committee in the community, and we just had a displacement of 9 trailers several months ago, and we still have people who are homeless in our community. And so you said there's 15 units currently occupied on the property. And so a lot of these people are like really fundamental parts of our community. Several of them probably work multiple jobs. And so there's probably a couple of businesses that are dependent on that. And I think there are people who would be willing to wait if they can make it work, but potentially having to wait for several months only to find out that these things are completely out of their price range really puts people in a bind. Moab, because of the nature of the lack of the housing crisis that we're in, which I really do appreciate that you guys are trying to address, and we absolutely do need these types of units. It is just kind of this really bittersweet thing that we're getting these things that we've been like dreaming of at the expense of kind of once again the people in our community who are the most vulnerable and who are least situated to really take this big of a shock to the system. Particularly now that like the total stock of really low income housing continues to dwindle further and further. And so we're in a situation where housing is just at like abysmal levels all across the board, but that one subsection of it is continuing to shrink more and more as our community continues to develop.
Thanks, Luke. Do you have any other questions or comments, anything from a council perspective else on this? Because y'all would be the, you talked a lot about these things directly.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm very heartened by the fact that like you all have kind of from the get-go tried to work with the city to keep the residents in mind. And I hope that that is something that continues throughout this process. I mean, at the end of the day, you guys have a legal right to do what you do with the property that you own. But just an understanding that, there's a lot of ripple effects that can potentially result from this, even with like good intent kind of carried throughout the process.
Yeah, well said. I think that was sort of the gist of a lot of the feedback, and I think concern and surprise we got was just, making sure that people have adequate notice, or trying to make it so there's at least big of sort of a footprint of ripple effects as possible from the project, which I think no one is opposed to this kind of project. I think it absolutely, we 100% need more units like this. You know, I echo Becky saying that really excited to see this finally penciling out for somebody. It's just that unfortunate trade-off of, you know, getting people into new housing and displacing people from existing housing right now. So yeah, the more affordable they can be, if there's a phased approach that's even feasible at all, where some folks can stay in their homes longer, or even, you know, now that people hopefully by and large are more on notice that this is something that's coming down in the pipeline, just allowing folks to stay as long as possible, I think is huge too. So
For sure.
thanks, Luke, and thanks again, Josh. Any other comments or question from commissioners while we have Josh here? Okay. Thank you again, Josh. If you want to just stay muted in case something comes up. We are at the stage where we can make a recommendation. Again, in the agenda item page of the agenda for this item, there's a recommended motion. It does have a fairly long condition. On the bottom of it should be included as well, if someone would like to make a motion.
Before we move to any actions, I'd like to explain that condition a little bit further.
Yeah.
I think we're all up to speed, but just for the sake of the record and the public out there, what this condition is doing is the Lost Springs apartment official site plan was submitted within the pending ordinance doctrine timeframe of Resolution 33/2021, which is essentially generating all the work that we've been doing on this ordinance for active employment households. So this project falls within the range of projects that would need to comply with this ordinance. However, we've yet to complete the actual ordinance. So we had been working with the developer on what was the rational basis thought process of how we were going to move them forward. And then with our land use attorneys coming in saying that really that structure needed to be consolidated at the end. We would not be able to approve any conditions that had not been approved by planning commission or by the city council. Therefore, this condition allows them to continue to move forward, which was the direction of the city council, was they wanted applicants and projects to be able to move through the process, but then come and comply after the fact. So what this is doing is requiring that the applicant and through them, the authorized agent for the applicant party, to sign a acknowledgement agreement that they will comply with whatever the ordinance is. So our site plan approval is contingent upon that. So if we get to the end of the process and the development team is uncomfortable, and again, like Josh said, it's of 12 units, there'll be a percentage of those because that's what's housed within the R3. So it's going to be fairly nominal portion of this project, but he, like Josh said, the intended use is 100%. That is what they're going to be applied throughout. But anyway, for whatever reason, they were not able to come into compliance with this ordinance. It would then void this condition of approval for site plan. So it's establishing some protection to the city that this project will comply with whatever that proposed ordinance for active employment units is, but allowing them to move forward with the process. So a bit long-winded, but I think it's important on the record. And for this motion, I'd like it to be stated and read in its entirety, just so that we have that in the full context. And any questions on that? So I want to kick it back to Kai if there's any motions, discussion, or a motion and then discussion following that. We're open to that.
Yeah, thanks for the explanation, Corey. So yes, that's just that in reference to our pending ordinance, understanding that all the approvals are going to be there, but some of pretty significant, specifics are missing from as far as what the requirement in the pending code changes are going to be for this particular development for the R3 portion. Hopefully the entirety of the C portion will be active employment households, so we won't have that issue. Anyone have any questions for Corey? We can also entertain a motion right now too, and then have further discussion if we need to.
I would like to make a motion, but I need somebody to put it on the screen. Sorry.
Oh yeah, Corey, you want to bring it up?
Right now, feeding the baby. Okay, I make a motion. I move that the City of Moab Planning Commission conditionally approve planning resolution number 01-2022, a planning resolution conditionally approving the level 2 site plan for the Lost Spring Apartments on property located at 238 South, 400 East, Moab, Utah, 84532 with the following condition. 1, all comments shall be addressed to the satisfaction of the Moab City Planning Director prior to building permit application approval. Comments include A, the authorized agent for the Lost Springs apartment site plan application number 21-0039 conditionally approved for planning resolution number 01-2022 shall sign an acknowledgement agreement declaring that the proposed site plan shall comply with the approved ordinance number 2022-05 upon city council approval, as is required for projects submitted during the active resolution period of resolution number 33-2021, period.
Thank you.
Nicely read, Becky.
I'll
have-
second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and we have a second. Any discussion before we take a vote on the motion on the table right now? For anyone, I'll just add in, they're, like we said, there are the legal requirements, and then there are our community really needs you guys to do your very best. And I'll just put my final plug in for that. And we really appreciate you being open and being communicative and understanding sort of where the current residents are coming from and where I think a lot of the concern from the community is. I think this has the potential to be a really good thing, and we really appreciate you guys, trying to do the right thing, even though you're not required to. That goes a long way in a community like ours. It really does. We don't take that for granted. So, any other discussion? All right, Corey, we can roll call it when you're ready.
All right. Jesso?
Aye.
Jeremy?
Aye.
Becky?
Aye.
Jill?
Aye.
Kaya?
Aye.
Thank you. That vote is unanimous in favor. 5 votes aye.
Thanks again, Josh, for talking with us. We appreciate it. Please, please stay in contact if you have any questions. We're a variety of people with a lot of resources and connections to a lot of, I think, the folks you're trying to serve with the eventual development. So we'd love to see the progress.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Have a good one. Thank you, everybody, for good discussion and feedback. Really appreciate it. It's a tough spot. I know it's a weird thing. That's one of the more bittersweet things I think we've had to look at in a while. So appreciate everybody's thoughtfulness.
Thank you for bringing up the community feedback, Kaya, as well as for your comments, Luke. I really appreciate that, and just reflect the sentiment that these are difficult, very difficult decisions. And anytime we do have an example of someone who's willing to work with the city and put a little more effort in, I think we should be supportive of that, but that doesn't make the decision any easier.
Yep, well said. Okay. I muted myself, sorry. On to future agenda items. What do we have other than the obvious?
Well, this has been a really long meeting. I'll keep it quite short. Thank you everyone for your participation. These were, first of all, for participating, being here tonight, and then also the really good information we got earlier in the the meeting. So we do have a couple of site plans pending. Like I've said for a long time, Lost Springs has been in that category. We're just trying to get it refined to the point that it's ready for you guys. The R3, R4, what we're now calling the Active Employment Household Ordinance 2022-05 is going to be becoming more and more detailed and intensive. So the next time that we meet, we will be seeing this at a public hearing. So it's going to, at that point, be fairly complete, and hopefully we're getting input by the community there. So anybody watching, I do know there were obviously a lot of people in the waiting room at the beginning of the meeting, hopefully a lot of people watching on YouTube. For this ordinance, for most people in the community, it's pretty obvious that the desire for that higher percentage. Of course, we've gotten some comments already reflecting that, but we need to keep in mind and in scope the ability with which we can use this tool. So it's not a completely arbitrary and discretional tool. We are being really channeled into a matter of math to come up with this number. So when we have the comments from the public saying, I want it to be 66, which is what Jessica kind of hinted at, and with the citizen to be heard at the prior meeting, we need to the percentage will be relatively fixed due to the math of what can be supported by our community. But the framework of the ordinance, that's where we can really use your help to design that so it's going to operate and work best. So with that plug being done, I'll kind of leave it at that. And then Jessica, you've stuck in without too much content. I was just wondering if there's anything you want to, yes, you contribute to staff report as far as future items or anything else that you got to say. Putting you on the spot, I guess.
Yeah, just a little bit. No, honestly, I've just been kind of trying to learn everything, and it's, as we started talking about having code brain, I've been having dreams about code at this point. Finally getting a hang of everything, and hopefully I can start helping Corey and take a lot of the weight off of his plate. He's been absolutely fantastic in supporting me. As it stands right now, I'm just learning how to process sign permits, and kind of like a side project has been creating cheat sheets. And as he mentioned earlier, the FAQs for residential folks to come in and be like, I'm trying to do this, and we've called it like the decision tree of, I want to do this, but do I go here or do I go here? So that's something I've been trying to start fleshing out, so we don't have a lot of folks calling in and be like, well, what's my zone? What can I do? We're trying to create a very easy to digest cheat sheet, so to speak, and really just make it a lot easier for everybody to understand how everything is supposed to go without having too much of a gray area, because that seems to be something I've noticed, that people are like, well, I saw it here, but I didn't see it here. So I went a little bit off tangent, but
No, that's great, Jessica. Thank you so much. And that's something, so Kaya and Becky, in the past, you've identified, especially with ADUs, we need a kind of play-by-play of what you can do, how you can do it. And Jessica, the way she's able to interpret code and digest it yields really well to this. So I think she's going to be able to translate that so our community can just really have a menu palette of how to develop. So Jessica's been great. Thank you for that.
yeah, thanks, Jessica, again. And great segue, Corey. Becky and I do have some very specific, very small, like literal sentence changes that we would like to propose to our parking requirements for a couple zones. So maybe we can set up something, Jessica, and actually get that into proper format to get it on the agenda and start those wheels moving, because I feel like it is something that could be really helpful. The sooner the better for projects that are forthcoming that we discussed this week. So also, maybe this is I guess I just want to bring to your attention, I feel like this individual is going to reach out to the planning department and potentially city council. I've been made aware recently of what I feel like is a really unfortunate effect of our ADU ordinance that ended up being passed by city council after, I would say, significant revisions from what the planning commission recommended to what was eventually approved by city council back in December of last year about updating, streamlining, and then also adding to our ADU code, where there are individuals who have had a property that when they bought it already had the structures on it and were being rented long-term with a duplex and an ADU, which of course is allowed as the type 1 ADU, but there's also there was an addition made to what was a final code provision that one of those units needed to be owner occupied, or else it would be in violation of that new section of code. And they received a ticket because they did not occupy one of those units, despite all three of them housing someone locally long-term for what I would say is a sadly dwindling nice price of a long-term rental in town. That to me is a pretty significant thing that I personally don't want to see happen. I think that if that's a side effect of something we did in code, I would like to advocate for fixing that. So just wanted to throw that out there so people are on notice. There was a provision added that said if you have a duplex with an ADU, external ADU, one of those three of the 2 duplex units or this external ADU, one of those has to be owner occupied. I would disagree with that being a necessity. And if anything, it's had the effect of displacing a local long-term resident from their housing. So
If I might on that, because that is not just this property, but a couple others. Really important. I think it's, first of all, really important to identify that the permitted use of an ADU with a duplex, if we want to think of it that way, was not permitted at all until this ADU ordinance came into effect. So this property was essentially over time, which is not uncommon for Moab, constructed in violation. There were additions throughout time that essentially built out a living situation that was not, it was built without a permit. And so there are conditions, safety conditions that were not put into place when that construction happened. So with the planning department pre-ADU ordinance approval, we're working with properties trying to get them into compliance. So when we drafted that ADU code, we tried to think about opportunities where there are existing ADUs or 2 household dwellings, duplexes that were built without a permit illegally, and people are trying to sell them now. But because of our technology, our ability to understand the properties, we're catching a lot of errors that were made historically. So we're not trying to place a lot of blame on the current owners or even the previous. But the fact of the matter is they weren't built to the appropriate standard, and our bottom line, not by legal definition, safe to the building code. Therefore, the whole purpose is try to get people compliant and get them safe. With this property in particular, like I said, we in the original ordinance had discussed elements of an amnesty program, that if there was a really unique situation, that we could try to get them as compliant as we could, but maybe they wouldn't be in violation in the same context. This might have been one of those properties that could have complied that way. The next was allowing duplexes to have that ADU, that detached type 1 ADU. But like I said, the addition of that ownership component was added throughout that process, and this is a byproduct of that. So I don't want to totally discredit the reason that ownership or the owner occupation component was added, because it was, again, we are increasing the density of a zone that's not designed for it. So the safety of the property, which is a holistic sense, and maintenance of the property in a holistic sense, is better accommodated when the owner is there. That was the purpose behind it. So that's not a bad reason for including the requirement, but like Kai is saying, it really wasn't maybe the original intention of holistically inclusionary housing. So really, Kaya, thank you so much for bringing it up. And this is one discussion in particular that I'm familiar with, and there are, I'm sure, many others going on. If anybody has an ADU or a two household that maybe isn't compliant or they're not aware of it, we'd love to help you get there, because that equity and the ability to move forward in compliance offers a lot of opportunity, versus if it is not in compliance, somebody's going to get penalized somewhere, whether it's the tenant, whether it's the owner. The only opportunity for everybody to win is to ensure that it's full bore, up to standards. So I really appreciate saying that.
Yeah, and it surprised me, honestly. I didn't realize that was in the final. And I went back through all the minutes and the agendas and found where it was added. I don't know the background of why necessarily, because it seems like it was in pre-council communications. But I think if there's some way we could figure out, like you said, some sort of making sure that the important safety aspects are met on existing duplexes that were created illegally. But like the reality is that people are living there. People need to live there. If there's a way we could make a distinction between a new external ADU on a duplex having to be owner occupied and one that already existed prior to a certain date where people have been living for decades, that would be great. Something like that, I feel like potentially could be an easy way to figure that out, and maybe assuage the concerns of like you said, this is one tool. We're not trying to increase the overall density of zones where it's not something that's allotted for. But the reality is if people are living happily and safely in housing right now, we certainly don't want to displace them for a reason that I think may have been an oversight. So
Is it more of a building department issue, or is it our ordinance? I'm confused.
I mean, if this particular individual, the ordinance was specifically cited when they received the violation notice.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, it's the additional, I can almost picture the subsection code. I think it's number 7 of whatever breakdown of what it is. But it's the ownership element added to a type 1 ADU, or excuse me, a type 1 ADU that is on a property with a duplex. So you're taking a property that has a maximum of 2 density, turning it into a property with 3 density. And because they increased it that much, they wanted to tie that in.
So it was a legal duplex with an ADU added illegally.
This one was actually, it was not. It was just a single household structure, as best we can tell, according to the county records. And then over history, it evolved without permits to a 2 household dwelling and a detached ADU that was probably originally built as a shed or studio, yoga studio or something, and then just got a little bit converted.
Yeah, that's so common in Moab, especially on like Mountain View, Hillside, Walker, Tusher, with these split level homes, or a house with a walkout basement, to be people kind of, I don't know, I don't think people do it on purpose necessarily, but they don't realize that they can't just like turn it into a duplex and then they list it for sale and the building department's like, what? This is not a duplex, this is a house.
That's exactly it. Yep.
Thanks for letting me go off on that side tangent, everyone, but I wanted to bring it up before I forgot. Great. Anyone have any other things we want to chat about quickly before we adjourn? Thank you again to everyone. This was a long meeting. Thanks to our new commission members, and to those with very small humans that they have to care for, who we get to see on camera. All right. I will, Becky, are you muted? I'm muted.
I have one quick thing to say. Jill, we swear our meetings aren't usually this long.
2 meetings now. Both long. I sit through board meetings, so I get it.
I feel like it's either 20 minutes or 3 hours, and there's no between.
Like,
no in between.
Liars.
Okay, it's okay.
Okay, that said, I will adjourn this meeting of the Moab City Planning Commission at 8:18 p.m. Thank you, everyone. Sidebar, please, please, please be at our next meeting. It is incredibly important more than ever. It's our last meeting on Zoom too. We will be resuming in-person meetings come April. So April 24th, 6 p.m. Please be here on Zoom. We need you and your input and a quorum very badly for that public hearing. So thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.